Welcome to Spot Podcast, the voice of scientists, where groundbreaking research meets your ears. We bring you the world's top-cited research articles in an engaging podcast format, making cutting-edge science accessible anytime, anywhere. Stay informed, stay inspired. This is the Spot Podcast, the voice of scientists.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that a lot of you have been asking about, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. We're talking about the possible implications of microplastics in pregnancy.
Yeah, definitely an important area of research.
We all know microplastics are, they're everywhere these days, but could they actually be impacting reaching developing babies?
It's a big question.
Well, a 2023 scientific article we dug up details this groundbreaking new study. And, well, it suggests that this might actually be happening. It was a study done on pregnant rats, and we're going to break it all down for you today.
It's a really interesting study, for sure. A lot to unpack there.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The study mentions that the average person ingests about 5 grams of microplastics every week. That's wild. That's like eating a credit card's worth of plastic every single week.
Yeah, that's kind of the shocking statistic, right? That's a lot of plastic. And the thing is, it's not like we're intentionally eating plastic, right? It's coming from the breakdown of larger plastic items over time.
Right. So it's kind of sneaking into our systems.
Exactly. It ends up in our drinking water, in seafood, even in things like salt.
Wow. So it's really pervasive.
Yeah, very much so. And there have been studies in the past that suggested that microplastics could actually cross the intestinal barrier.
Really?
Yeah. And reach other organs in the body. But this study that we're looking at today, this is the first one to actually look at pregnancy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this study, it was done on pregnant rats. What exactly did they do?
Well, they gave these pregnant rats a dose of 25 nanometer polystyrene microplastics. And that's actually a level that's pretty comparable to what humans might ingest.
Okay.
So, we're talking about levels that are relevant to our everyday lives.
Wow. And what did they find? What happened to those rats?
Okay, so get this. They analyzed the rats and their fetuses just 24 hours later.
24 hours?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how fast it happened.
So they didn't even wait very long.
No, and the results were honestly pretty astonishing.
What did they see?
Okay, so they found the microplastics not only in the mother's bodies, but also in the placentas.
No way.
Yeah. And even more than that, in all fetal tissues.
Oh, fetal tissues.
That they examined, yeah. So we're talking the liver, kidneys, heart, lungs, and even the brain.
The brain. Wow. So these tiny little particles are crossing not just one, but 2 major barriers.
Exactly.
First, the intestinal wall in the mother.
Right.
And then the placental barrier to reach the fetus. That's kind of mind-blowing. How is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the scientists are actually still working out exactly how microplastics are able to cross that intestinal wall. But the fact that they can, that's really the crucial point here.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to the placental barrier in rats, it's structured a bit differently than in humans.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does that translate to us?
Right. We'll definitely discuss those differences, a little bit later on. But what's really fascinating is that the structure of the human placenta, it might actually make it even easier for microplastics to pass through.
Wait, hold on. Easier. So human babies could be even more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a possibility.
This is getting a little scary, to be honest.
Well, I don't want to jump to the conclusions just yet. More research is definitely needed to confirm that.
Okay. That's fair.
But it's certainly something to consider.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the rat study.
Okay.
They found these microplastics in the fetal tissues, but what did they actually look like?
Well, they weren't just, floating around individually. They were actually found in these clusters.
Clusters.
Yeah, about 10 to 25 micrometers in size.
Okay.
And this clustering suggests that they might have been engulfed by macrophages.
What?
Macrophages.
Macrophages.
Yeah. Think of them like the body's cleanup crew.
Okay.
They're these immune cells that go around engulfing foreign substances.
So they're like little Pac-Mans.
Yeah, kind of. And here's where it gets really interesting. If microplastics are building up, accumulating in these immune cells, could that actually impair fetal development?
Oh.
Could that mess with their immunity?
That's a good question.
Yeah. And what are the long-term consequences of that? We don't know. This study doesn't answer those questions.
Yeah.
But it definitely raises some red flags.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's a little unsettling. It makes you wonder, what else did they find?
Well, they also discovered that the placentas of the exposed rats, they actually weighed less in those in the
Oh.
control group.
So, like smaller placentas, what does that even mean?
Well, placental weight can actually be an indicator of its efficiency, how well it's able to transport nutrients and oxygen to the fetus.
So, a smaller placenta, does that mean that the fetus might not be getting everything it needs?
Potentially, yeah, it's possible. But we do have to acknowledge that there were some limitations to this study.
Oh, okay.
The control group wasn't subjected to the same gavage procedure,
Okay.
so stress might have actually played a role in those smaller placentas.
So we can't say for sure that it was just the microplastics.
Right. More research is needed to really confirm that effect.
Okay. So this study leaves us with more questions than answers,
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
which I guess is kind of how science works sometimes.
Absolutely. It's all about building on what we know.
Right. But we're not just talking about one study here.
No, definitely not.
This research kind of fits into a bigger picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This study, along with others that are mentioned in this article, it's starting to paint, a pretty concerning picture of the potential impact of microplastics on offspring health.
So what are we talking about here?
I mean, we're talking about potential links to things like metabolic disorders, growth restriction, even brain abnormalities.
Wow. Okay.
And remember, this study, it used pristine spherical polystyrene microplastics,
Okay.
and real-world microplastics, they're much more diverse than that.
Oh, so how are they different? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, they come from all sorts of different sources, and they're often weathered by the environment.
Weathered.
Yeah, so they've been exposed to the sun, wind, salt water, all of that. And that can actually make microplastics more reactive, potentially more harmful.
Oh, wow. So the microplastics in this study, they might just be the tip of the iceberg
Exactly.
when it comes to the potential effects.
Yeah, it really underscores the urgent need for more research using more, realistic, environmentally relevant microplastics. We need to understand how different types of microplastics behave in the body
Right.
and what that means for both mothers and their developing babies.
That makes a lot of sense. This study looked at polystyrene, but I mean, there are so many other common polymers out there
Right.
that need to be studied. Like, where do we even begin to tackle a problem this big?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think a good place to start is to, dig a little deeper into this whole idea of weathering.
Okay.
Think about it. A plastic water bottle sitting out in the sun for months, even years.
Yeah.
That sun, the UV radiation, the heat, even just the physical forces of wind and rain, all that stuff, it breaks down that plastic's molecular structure.
So it's not just getting smaller.
Right.
It's changing.
Exactly. It's changing chemically.
Okay.
This weathering process, it can create cracks and pits on the surface of the microplastic.
Uh-huh.
It can also cause the release of chemicals that were originally added to the plastic, during manufacturing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And are those chemicals harmful?
Well, that's the big concern.
Yeah.
Some of these additives have been linked to, hormone disruption, developmental issues, even cancer.
Oh, wow.
And when they're attached to a microplastic, it's like they have this vehicle to travel throughout the body
Oh, okay.
and potentially reach, really sensitive tissues.
Okay, so weathered microplastics could be even more of a problem than the pristine ones that they used in this study.
Potentially, yeah.
That's a little alarming, especially when you think about all the ways that we're exposed to microplastics every day.
It really highlights the need for more research
Yeah.
to understand, the full scope of the risks
Right.
associated with weathered microplastics. We need to develop better ways to, detect them and measure them
Yeah.
in the environment and in our food chain.
Okay, so that's the bigger picture. But, for anyone listening, especially if you're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, I mean, this might all feel a little overwhelming.
I can understand that.
Should we be extra worried about this?
Well, it's understandable to be concerned,
Right.
but it's important to remember that this was a study in rats.
Right.
And their placental structure is different from humans.
Right. You mentioned earlier that the human placenta might actually be more permeable,
Yeah.
meaning it could be easier for those microplastics to pass through. What makes the human placenta different?
The human placenta has a thinner barrier layer
Okay.
compared to rats. So it's possible that thinner barrier could allow for, those tiny particles to kind of slip through more easily.
So while this rat study is, really eye-opening,
Yeah,
we can't necessarily assume that the exact same thing is happening in humans,
right.
but it definitely highlights that we need more research specifically on humans.
Absolutely. We need to determine if and how much, these microplastics are crossing the placenta in humans.
Right.
And we need to assess the potential impact on fetal development.
Okay, so until we have more definitive answers, what can people do to, minimize their exposure to microplastics?
That's a great question. It's nearly impossible these days to completely eliminate microplastic exposure,
Right.
but there are things you can do to reduce your intake.
Okay.
One simple thing is to filter your drinking water.
Are there certain types of filters that are better for this?
Yeah, you want to look for filters that use activated carbon
Okay.
or a combination of carbon and other filtration technologies. Reverse osmosis systems are also very effective.
Good to know. What about food?
When it comes to food, choosing fresh, whole foods over processed foods is always a good strategy.
Okay.
Processed foods often come in plastic packaging,
Right.
and they may also contain microplastics from, the processing and packaging equipment.
So cooking more at home,
Exactly.
back on takeout.
Yep. And when you do buy packaged foods, look for alternatives to plastic whenever possible.
Okay.
Choose glass, metal, paper containers.
What about all the reusable plastic containers we have these days?
That's a good question. In general, reusable containers are a much better choice than single-use plastics.
Okay.
But it is important to handle them carefully.
How so?
Avoid heating them in the microwave
Okay.
or exposing them to really high temperatures because that can increase the chances of chemicals leaking into your food.
Gotcha. So hand washing is the way to go with those reusable containers.
Generally, yeah. And always, check for any signs of wear and tear.
Like cracks or scratches and things.
Exactly, and replace them when needed.
Okay. So those are all great tips for reducing our personal exposure.
Right.
But I mean, this microplastic problem feels pretty huge.
It is.
Like, what's being done on a larger scale to address it?
Well, awareness is definitely growing. There are a lot of initiatives underway to reduce plastic production and waste,
Okay.
improve recycling processes, and develop, more biodegradable alternatives to traditional plastics.
That's encouraging. But it sounds like it's going to take a lot of effort
Oh, absolutely.
from, individuals, governments, and industries.
It's going to take all of us.
Yeah, to really tackle this problem.
It's a collaborative effort for sure, but ultimately the goal is to protect, both human health and the environment
Right.
from the potential harms of microplastic pollution. We've talked a lot about ways to reduce exposure.
Right.
But what can we do to push for bigger solutions?
That's a really good question. It feels like we need some pretty big changes to really make a difference here.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot. For starters, you can support organizations
Okay.
that are working to reduce plastic pollution
Right.
and promote sustainable alternatives.
Uh-huh.
There are also, advocacy groups that are pushing for stronger regulations
Okay.
on plastic production and waste management.
So, making those conscious choices as consumers and supporting the organizations that are fighting for change.
Right?
What about these biodegradable plastics that we hear so much about? Are those a viable solution?
They definitely hold promise, but it's important to understand that they're not, a perfect solution.
Right.
Some biodegradable plastics require very specific conditions to break down,
Okay.
like industrial composting facilities,
Oh,
and those aren't available everywhere.
So we can't just assume that something that's labeled biodegradable is going to magically disappear
Right, exactly.
in the environment.
It's important to look for, certifications and labeling
Okay.
that clearly explain how and where that plastic will break down.
So we need to be really informed consumers.
Yeah.
And do our research even when it comes to things that sound like they're eco-friendly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think, the big one is that microplastic pollution is a serious issue
Yeah.
that we're only beginning to understand.
Right.
These tiny particles are everywhere.
It's true.
And we're just starting to uncover their potential impact on human health, especially, during pregnancy.
Yeah, it's been eye-opening to learn about all the different ways that we're exposed.
Right.
And how these particles might be affecting, developing babies.
And I think this research it's a wake-up call,
Uh-huh.
but it's also empowering.
How so?
It gives us the knowledge to make more informed choices
Okay.
and to push for better solutions.
You can't just wait for all the answers.
Exactly. We have to take action now
Right.
to reduce our exposure and protect ourselves and future generations.
Okay, and how do we do that?
Well, remember those simple steps we talked about.
Right.
Filtering your water,
Uh-huh.
choosing fresh foods,
Yeah.
minimizing single-use plastics,
Right.
being mindful of those reusable containers.
Right, and also supporting those organizations that are fighting for change.
Yes.
And advocating for policies that promote a more sustainable future.
This research might feel overwhelming, but I think it's important to remember that, even small changes can make a big difference.
Yeah.
When we all work together, Every step we take to reduce plastic waste is a step towards a healthier future.
I love that. This has been a fascinating and definitely thought-provoking deep dive. It's clear that microplastics are a complex issue
For sure.
with far-reaching implications. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, knowledge is power. We hope that this information empowers you to make more informed choices
Absolutely.
and to advocate for a world where microplastics no longer pose a threat to human health or the environment. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those questions coming.
Stay curious, keep exploring, and join us next time for more groundbreaking research brought straight to your ears. Don't forget to subscribe and share, because science is meant to be heard.